Do you believe pop art is a typical American phenomenon?
I see it all around now.
People are familiar with Andy Warhol, Roy Lichtenstein, Jim Dine, but were there counterparts in other global regions that were addressing many of the same themes?
Pop art seems to me to be neither serious enough nor funny enough to serve as more than a 9 days wonder.
Pop would arrive or present itself in different places with different aesthetic histories underpinning it.
I mean, we think about big, colorful paintings with bold contours as our stereotype of pop, but there were all these different varieties.
In France, you had Nouveau Realism, a group of artists such as Christo, Niki de Saint-Phal,
Yves Klein, César, Martial Rice.
Meet Gene Tingley, who may be an artist or an inventor or a philosopher, depending on how you look at his masterpieces. They are a sort of abstract industrialism, weird and wonderful machines that work superbly but serve absolutely no useful purpose.
This was a group of artists that were very much looking at Duchamp and the ready-made tradition. So you have artists who are incorporating found objects into their work, turning away from studio practice, very much making their work in a public setting. These actions, these objects, all came back to some fundamental idea around the blurring of the boundaries between art and everyday life, the use of found relics. Martial Rice would make these extraordinary trees made out of plastic bottles that he found. It was a lot of the criticism of pop early on, was it was just junk. And the artists loved that. They loved the junk.
What's interesting about pop as a term, it's kind of like a linguistic virus that just gloms itself onto any production by artists in the period that engages a popular reel, whether it's objects or whether it's visual imagery that comes out of comic books or advertising.
Herr Steenbeck, ist das nun Pop-Art, was Sie da machen?
Wie? Pop-Art?
Man muss doch mal fragen dürfen, schließlich.
Nein, bitte nicht. Das ist funktionelle Kunst.
The Capitalist Realists is a group that was based in Germany in the early 1960s.
They included figures such as Gerhard Richter, Sigmar Polke, Manfred Kuttner, and Konrad Lueck.
Meine Kollegen und ich wollten eben was anderes machen, was auch gegen das Abstrakte ist und dem Wunsch nach einer neuen Figürlichkeit nachkommen.
They used to stage these happenings on, like there was one that was done on the lawn of a famous art dealer. They just took their paintings on some cold winter day, threw them in the back of a truck, took them to the country home of this dealer and like set up these amazing paintings on the lawn.
Various approaches that we might align with pop, which were emerging in different centers around the world, all came out of whatever came before. So in the US, for example, people often talk about the large canvases of pop art being relatable to the large canvases of abstract expressionism.
Increasingly in the 20th century, art has carried on a dialogue with itself. Art leads to art, and with internal sequence. After the heroic years of abstract expressionism, a younger generation of artists is working in a new American regionalism.
But ABX was not in the ascendancy in Sao Paulo or Rio de Janeiro coming out of the 1950s. There you had concrete art, and slightly later an offshoot known as neo-concretism. Concrete art was a form of geometric abstraction, a rational approach to art making that stayed away from life, from representation, from the body. And really a lot of works by a lot of different artists in Brazil during the 60s, they are graphic, visually appealing, responding to the now, and they're also carrying aspects of geometric abstraction, of the grid, of formal organization from concrete art. A poet called Augusto de Campos called this stuff popcrete.
The generations before mine, they really suffered quite a bit. this is a new age for artists in Brazil. I think we're beginning to do something very important here.
Frankly, pop was a youth movement, right? The abstract expressionists, that was the old guard. These were kids. These were, you know, in Japan, these young artists were considered punks. They didn't have any place. And frankly, some of the imagery that they were using was considered really vulgar and tacky.
Shinohara Yoshio, who was then a young artist in Tokyo, he saw US pop art in periodicals and magazines that were distributed to Japan and said famously, the first one to imitate shall win.
発表するわけね。で、イミテーション、これ偽物。ね、僕は本当に喜びを感じたんだから、それ自分の領地に全然もう来たわけよね。だからそれはもうすごく新しいっていうかもう。
And so we have an artist who is apparently being derivative of US art, but who's actually anticipating a whole new area in art history that would emerge later in the 70s and 80s, known as appropriation art, which rather than being a derivation of other art, is actually an understanding of how art functions in culture and society and how you can recycle it to new effect and new meanings.
Pop is a pretty big topic. Yet, at the same time, I think people's assumptions about what pop is can be extraordinarily narrow.
In order to do a show called International Pop, we had to refresh and revise what people think about or what people talk about when they talk about pop.
These different art histories were shaping where pop was coming from. Pop might just have been the most open category in some respects, and we want to celebrate that openness.